All right, almost on time. Ah, traffic was a miserable nightmare. All right, so we're here, we're live, we did it. Man, uh, we'll give everybody the usual few minutes to get in, notifications, all that kind of stuff. Although I'm sure, like, my whole channel's ruined now because of one video. Hadn't noticed my video from last weekend where I talked. I used a saltwater still image from a little bit of B-roll as my thumbnail, and man, the the uh, the viewership on that was just like, whoop. So obviously people don't come to me to learn anything about saltwater. But hopefully for those of you who watched it, you enjoyed like the kind of story time side of it and just battling about uh kind of getting to meet somebody who's an absolute like master craftsman when it comes to custom aquariums. And yeah, it's kind of a real treat to meet Mr. Jason from Clear Fabrications, the guy that made like Corey's tank and all that kind of stuff. Real blast for me. I had a lot of fun. Yeah, it was kind of like an impromptu video. Just what do you do? Anyway, Miss Silverwing, I appreciate it. I wasn't even live and you put a super chat in. That's really awesome. But for all the questions I've asked you, thank you for the answers. Can't watch live, but will later tonight. Have a great live stream. I will, thanks to you. You're the best. No, it's been fun helping you and answering some of your questions, and it's one of those things that like I do get behind on my email, especially when I'm working as much as I have been lately, which I found out I'll be working 4th of July weekend. That's how like crazy busy my work is. Not even a holiday protects us from work. But yeah. What do we got here? So hopefully you saw my thumbnail. I want to like I literally just got home, so like I did not get the normal live stream prep I would prefer to do. But I want to bring this up. I had this on my Instagram. There we go. My brain finally decided to function. Oh, Lord. Can you guys tell that I'm a little frazzled? But I had this picture on my Instagram, and it's something that my lady took. She caught Danger Noodle. I'm getting it like live edited to fit the screen right now. There we go. Bam! So I don't know if you can see that, but you've got Kitchen Nightmares, and over here you got, or over here, I arranged myself differently. You have Danger Noodle like hammocking, literally watching the television. And my lady sent this to me around, like noon, somewhere between noon and 1. It was like my lunch hour, basically. Like, which is a lie. I don't actually get like an hour for lunch. I eat my lunch at my desk while working. But she was trying to cheer me up, and I kind of like I had that thought where I was like, I want to talk about some fish that sometimes need a little bit more, right? And I find this like photo hilarious because that Dojo Loach quite literally will hear when she's watching Gordon Ramsay shows and come out and plant himself somewhere where he can watch. No joke. We've caught him like this multiple times on photo and he just doesn't care. He's just transfixed. It's like his idol is Gordon Ramsay or something. I don't know. It's very funny, but I think about things like your bettas, right? I'm building a betta tank for my brother-in-law, and we'll have like an update on that very soon. He's picked his betta. I'm not spoiling that ahead of time, but it's a pretty cool fish. It's currently kind of doing a little tour of duty in quarantine while his tank gets all the way set up. So like we got through ammonia, we're in the nitrite phase of his cycle. We're starting to get little bits of diatom algae in his tank. kind of teaching him how to cycle it and what each stage means, right? But one of the things I mentioned to him is like, some bettas, they need interaction. They need kind of things to stimulate their brains. They're actually pretty smart fish. And you get people that can eventually teach their fish how to like jump through hoops or do little tricks and all sorts of stuff. It just depends on how much you interact with your fish. Now, me, and personally, I was telling him, like, we should probably just put a lid on your tank, right? We don't want to risk your betta jumping out, but you could, in theory, teach your betta to, like, go through a little hoop or something like that, where you give him, you teach him to go through, and that's how he gets food or whatever it might be, right? Little stuff like that. That's got him pretty excited. And so I was kind of thinking about, like, think about your super interactive fish, right? Your Oscars, your flower horns, your puffers, because puffers are super smart and super personable. A lot of these personable fish, part of it is they need a little bit extra when it comes to interaction, entertainment, whatever it may be. Or do they? Right? Do they actually need? A lot of us will say yes, they really do. And it depends on the fish, right? I think some of your more intelligent fish really need something other than just to like float around the tank. Are they kind of bored? I think it's part of, much like with us people, right? The more we stimulate our minds, in theory, the healthier our long-term life is going to be. We keep ourselves mentally sharp, acute and aware. It helps us long-term. Are fish the same? Are certain fish that don't need that? You think like your tetras and stuff, they aren't quite as interactive other than like, oh, I've learned that like when this person comes to the glass, I'm probably going to get food. Whereas other fish really do pay attention to you. Really do pay attention to you in the sense of it's not just when you feed. You can be in there working on something, they're trying to figure out what you're doing. Or like when you're working in their tank, they're trying to figure out what's going on, right? Do we need to elevate that to the level of actually finding ways to entertain our fish? Are all fish, or some fish, or no fish? And this is where chat, I feel free to chime in. I'm curious your own experience. Do they need entertainment? They need us to do that little bit extra, like laser pointers, right? I've seen people use laser pointers and get their fish to chase them, or stuff like that, like it would do a cat or dog, right? Using effectively a toy to engage their fish. Now, for me personally, I've got Danger Noodle. Danger Noodle likes to watch some TV. It's really specific. It's interesting because he doesn't park himself in front of the spots where he can see the TV clearly, or at least to what I think is seeing it clearly. Who actually knows, right? Unless it's certain things, which most of the time is Gordon Ramsay. I find that hilarious. Anytime we'll watch some other stuff, goes and hides somewhere, takes a nap, doesn't care, not pointed at the TV at all. It's really interesting. And it's probably some kind of a confirmation bias where I'm only paying attention the most when this is what's on the television, right? Or like if I drop down and, oh, my lady's watching like some Hell's Kitchen reruns, things like that. Or here we go, Snail Team 6 in chat saying, I was using laser pointers on my Oscars about an hour ago. See that? Shirish. This, not quite fish, but this is still interesting. Cannabis growers for years played music in their grow rooms. Right? You've got the concept of like certain animals responding to certain types of music. You want to hear something like really funny? Lulu, my dog who had the surgery, which she's doing pretty dang good. We've tried a couple different types of music in the car, and the stuff that she likes the most, 80s music. 80s, like, specifically, like, 80s hits. So, mostly pop, right? But if it's 80s music, she seems to, like, be a little more upbeat and happy and doesn't need as much interaction in the car. Because she's kind of she wants to be held up to where she can see the windows if she's down on the floorboards, or be able to sit in a chair on her own, but she'll whine when the car stops. But if we have 80s music playing, she doesn't whine. Weird little observation. We've tried like other stuff. We've tried 90s and thousands stuff. We've tried rock. We've tried electronic music. We've tried more like some like kind of video game music and more classical stuff off of cell phones. None of it has the effect of 80s, which is real weird to me. Because 80s music is it's a special animal. But yeah, it's interesting how these like little things, right, can affect our fish. And I just want to talk like super briefly on that. After this, we'll just go into full Q&A. I have been working my brains out, so like a more studied subject I did not have this week. But Joe Davis has asked me to tell you about rainbows. Rainbows are not the smartest fish in the world, but they're also not shy. So your rainbows are like, and some will be shy. Like I have some wild caught rubra striata, and they're really shy fish. I walk in the room and they go hiding, right? But most of my rainbows, they're at the front of the tank like all the time. Whenever they know a human's in the room, they're just like they're kind of paying attention to you. Mostly because they want to beg for food. They have like bottomless stomachs. But they have their chill modes and they have their like let's spar and show off for the ladies mode, which I always find very entertaining to sit and watch. The tank in my room, not my room, that's this one, but the tank in my like living room area, which has all my Blaharii and my Frederici. The Frederici are pretty chill, although lately the one big male Frederici has started to spar with some of the Blaharii, which is pretty cool to watch because he's like half their size. But he's trying to get in there and show that he's a boss too. I'll let it fly, Snail Team 6. YouTube's trying to clamp down on that bad boy. But it's rainbows. We often like joke as they're kind of like the older guys will call them like the dumb blondes of the fish world. It's a very common joke in some of the like Australian keepers who go catch them is like they're super pretty but not the smartest fish in the world. And the biggest thing is like they get so focused on certain things they don't pay attention to everything else around them. So like when the boys are sparring, they pay no attention to like the rocks and stuff around them. So they'll ram their face into a rock and like they'll schmuck up their nose, or they'll scrape across a piece of wood and knock a scale off their side. They get so focused on certain things that they like just forget everything else that's around them. And it's a little adorable in the sense of like, it's like, oh, you dumb butt. What are you doing? Hispanic mechanic, aren't animals smarter the higher up the food chain they are in? So in general, the higher up the food chain, like your predators are, they tend to be animals with larger brains in general. So they usually are smarter, but not always. You get plenty of prey species, right, that are incredibly smart compared to what the predator species of the same, like, it's not genus, but type of animal. So like birds are a great example. The smartest birds out there are ravens and crows and everything basically in the corvid family. But hawks, eagles that are the predator birds, they're not the smartest birds. It's the corvids that are actually the smartest. And you can watch videos on YouTube and all sorts of stuff where they'll get ravens and crows to solve puzzles to figure out how to get food. And they solve them very fast. Or think about animals like squirrels. Squirrels are incredibly intelligent problem solvers. So are mice and rats, right? You can get them to solve all sorts of puzzles that bigger animals who are technically predators don't solve. You can get some of your cats and stuff like that don't have those puzzle solving skills, but they have other skills that of some level of intelligence, right? So it all kind of depends, but in general, like a very large cichlid, some kind of like larger fish or something, is probably quite a bit smaller than something like a tetra, right? They're naturally much bigger. They have, in theory, more brain space and usually a larger brain, but there are plenty of examples of big dumb things in the world, right? It's just like with people, some are smarter than others, but it's a reasonable rule, right? That like the higher up the food chain in general tend to be smarter, but you got plenty of stuff that's not like the top of the food chain that's incredibly smart. It's like elephants, for example, right? They're technically not the top of a food chain, but they're very smart. You know, several bird species are definitely not the top of the food chain. Very smart. You know, rats can do some incredible stuff and figure out a ton of stuff. Definitely not the top of the food chain, right? And not even really that high on the food chain, but tend to not have a ton of predators as well that really go after them. Snail Team 6. Bet you any of my bettas are smarter than either of my Oscars. Possible. You've got plenty of fish who are like much smarter for their size. But yeah. I don't know. Something I want to talk about. So, for guys, if you've got questions at Bentley Pasco, makes it super easy to see. Chat's rolling a little slow tonight, which is good. Means I won't get super far behind. And then for some reason, you have something more complicated. Bentley Pasco, or Bentley.Pasco specifically. Can't even remember my own email. At gmail.com. You can shoot me an email. We're working on basically kind of getting close to getting the first in-depth solutions ready. I'm getting close enough to where we're seeing enough results in the person I've been working with. There's one more person I need to get back to and see kind of the checkup with them for kind of the second episode. But if you want to get in on that, the like kind of intro video to that whole series will be coming here soon. I'm kind of excited to do that because I like helping people with their tanks. Our first super chat with the night was like a person who's been asking me questions via email, and I've been helping out where I can. It's one of those things where I like helping people whenever I can, but some of that information just doesn't. It hasn't necessarily turned into videos, and a lot of times I think you can have a generic video like how to fight algae, and that's great, but when you get an exact case and you get to watch the process unfold of how a problem in a tank is isolated and figured out and then attacked at, right? So that we can get that tank into better shape or make it like healthy, get rid of algae, deal with potentially fish disease, which hopefully you don't come to me with fish disease. I'm not that great at fish disease, but certain things I can handle pretty well. Those are the things that I'm looking forward to having those more direct examples, because I feel like with those super direct examples, it's much easier to understand the process and watch how that process affects the problem, right? Where if I tell you like, hey, when you have algae, it's usually one of three things. So we start this long process, and a lot of people will kind of want just the answer to their problem and not necessarily learn the process. And I feel like when you have a direct example you can watch the process unfold with, it's easier to passively learn that process while learning the actual answer at the same time. Maybe that's me. I don't know. But hopefully people like it. If all else fails, I'm going to help a few people with their tanks, and hopefully people enjoy that part of the series too, like getting to watch that process. Joe Davis. Cooking dinner, so my hands are restricted. What's the most interesting behavior you've witnessed in a fish based off an outside stimulus? Honestly, that would be, there's this video, it's kind of notorious on YouTube, of a older gentleman who works as a groundskeeper, basically, where there's this massive koi pond. And he walks the fish around the pond and has them follow him, and you get this big column of fish swimming. And I've struggled to refine the video. I remember watching it like 3 years ago. And he just walks around the pond, and they follow him in this big line as he's moving around and like doing little figure eights and stuff, and they just continuously follow him. And he basically takes them on like a little exercise walk through the pond. Not dropping food the whole time, they just follow him around. And it's very interesting to me to see fish that are that personable to somebody who, like, he's in waders and all this stuff, walking around in the pond, right? Just this older guy who's works there. And it's real interesting to see that they're just gonna follow him around, see what's going on, what's this human doing. And, you know, part of it's probably, when do we get the food, right? He's probably the person that feeds them every day. But it was one of those things where I like watching that, and then similarly watching somebody who had trained their plakat betta to like jump through hoops. So they would put the hoop just barely above the water, and the fish would jump up and out of the water and in through the hoop and back down in, and could do this over and over and over again. And he would like just rattle his fingers, you know, just kind of do this on the tank rim, and the fish would come up like it was food time. And he'd put the little ring down, jump through the hoop, feed him one pellet of food, put the ring, jump, feed him one little pellet of food, right? And he'd give him a few, you know, like granules or small betta-sized pellets. And then then the fish would almost immediately go and rest on the same hammock after he was done every time. until like the ring got dropped back down again, then come over, jump. Just little things like that. People who can teach their fish to do little tricks like that, I find it extremely amusing, especially with smaller fish, right? Because you can think of something like a dolphin or something like that. They're extremely smart, and they can do all sorts of things. But seeing that in like the fish that we often take for granted, just like, oh, we keep our tank and we try to keep it healthy and we feed our fish and do this stuff, but don't necessarily think like, yeah, you could teach this fish tricks just like it was a dog. And like, you know, you get the people who like they're parrotfish, right? I've seen this video where a person has a parrotfish that he wants to like basically snuggle into the guy's hand, and then he lets go and it goes like racing across this like outdoor tank or whatever, and it comes back and immediately like wants to snuggle back into the hand over and over again. You know, so it's little things like that, just like kind of amusing. I definitely can't do it with rainbow fish. They're not that smart, but it's fun to watch. Oh, let's see here. Bob Purcell, real quick question. Not that one. KH Carver. Don't worry. I'm coming to you, Bob. Can't make out the logo on the baseball cap. What's the team this week? This is the Hillsboro Hops. I've worn this a couple times. I just really like the color combinations to the light blue back here. This like really dark navy up here. Then you've got the actual like mascot wearing a similar hat, except for it's dark blue all the way up top and only light blue on the bill. There's a lot of like color coordination in the logo that I really like in this hat. Can't help it. Plus, it's like this big bearded hop as a logo, which I find amusing. Okay. One question I want to get to, then, Bob, I'm getting back to you. Michael Melieri, my sand, 3 inches deep, has algae growing on top. Is there a reason I can't just mix the algae under the surface of the sand to kill it off instead of manually removing it? So, you probably could. The problem is that it's likely to come back. When we remove the algae, we can help mitigate some of the growth long term. I would be curious what kind of sand you're dealing with, because it's probably some kind of excess level of silicates, and that's what's helping that algae flourish. Not all the time, but sometimes that's the case. I've noticed this most often for me personally with the pool filter sand that I get here that has a much finer grain to it. But, yeah, I've tried doing that personally in some of my tanks, like forcing the algae underneath, and all I end up running into is like a massive wad of algae underneath my sand and more on top. But your results might be different than mine, because you might be using a very different sand. You have probably a thicker bed than I did. I don't think I had 3 inches in the tanks where I've used sand. I've typically like about 1.5 to 2 inches. So you might have a better success trying that out. And all I can say is try it. The other thing you can do for a lot of those algae is if you go get like Flourish XL into your liquid carbons. Okay, so darker brown using like a carob sea, I think you got a better chance there because a little less of the silicates and that stuff because it's a more natural sand as opposed to some of the stuff that we use to make pool filter sand. Anyway, the other thing you do is take some Excel and like in a little dropper or a very small syringe, lightly go in and go right over the top of the algae and just squirt a tiny amount on it. No more than the total amount that it recommends for the day, right? Or for the week. You want to still be careful of that. But if you do it directly onto the algae, the liquid carbon, and more importantly, the glutaraldehyde that's a part of most liquid carbon products, Excel, it's definitely in there, will kill that algae off. And you can just kind of slowly fight it that way and target it. It might be a little easier going that method. And I guess it depends on the type of algae. Like, are you getting blackbeard algae? Are you getting cyanobacteria, so blue-green algae? Are you seeing like some kind of other slime algae? Each algae is really specific in how you fight it. Hopefully it's not staghorn. That can be a little bit of a pest, but it's still doable, right? You can still get rid of it. So yeah. Ray V found the video of the guy walking koi. It's a Daily Mail video. Don't know if it's okay to post a link here. You can post a link. It'll like instantly flag it, but I can repost it. so you can try, Ray. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's a hoot of a little video. It's short. I think there's a longer version of it somewhere that I remember seeing, but all right, Bob, your turn, buddy. How long can community fish, Bolivian rams, pencilfish, hatchetfish, cories, endlers go without food if I'm on vacation? So it depends on how healthy they are at first, right? In general, I would say you can go a week without feeding your fish and be pretty okay. You can, in theory, go longer. However, I personally would try not to go too much longer. Even a lot of your small fish are pretty good at dealing with several days in a row without food. A week is kind of where you start to push it. But keep in mind, like, you've got lots of, like, biofilm and microorganisms and stuff that will be in your tank that they will find ways to feed off of. So they'll get small amounts of food, just not as much as like when we would feed them, right? So I guess it depends on how long your vacation is, and if you have an auto feeder, of course, those can be super helpful, or somebody who can drop by like just once in the middle of your vacation, and you just have a pre-packaged thing of fish food that just says like, hey, this goes just this amount, you just dump it in the tank or whatever it may be. That's kind of the other solution, right? Is just like one kind of in the middle, but yeah. In general, I'd say a week is relatively safe. Even with some of those smaller fish like that, most fish don't need much more than about 1% of their total body weight per day in food. And if they're not eating every day, they can go several days without food if they've had a like kind of healthy several days of meals beforehand. As long as you've got everything else going, you should be just okay. I'm gonna answer that question for you, Michael. One sec. I'm pretty certain they haven't gone away. Pretty certain I still have channel memberships, according to this YouTube thing I do. There you go. If for some reason you want to join, maybe it's just a clever way to make me a better YouTuber, and if so, Michael, you're far more clever than I am. But there's a link for joining. Certain mobile devices, if you're on a mobile device, don't show the join link very well. I've noticed that over time. But I'm a terrible YouTuber. I don't care that much about memberships. Other than, like, if you do them, cool. But me, like, constantly going, like, become a member. No, that's not me, man. It's just not me. All right. Chirish And you know how long it took me to figure out how to say your name correctly? I just want to put that out there. Because, like, used to be in, I think I saw you the most in, like, Corvus Hoskins' chat, right? It wasn't until he said it a couple times right where I was finally like, so that's how you say that. And hopefully that's correct. But have you ever tried one of those twin star algae inhibitors? They look like HHO generators to me, just splitting the oxygen and hydrogen. That's literally all they are. So all they are, because like Dean's made a homemade version of this, and he had it on his, I think it was his Instagram or something a while back, and I think Jimmy even did some stuff about it in a video. But all it is a little thing passing an electric current to split the hydrogen and oxygen atoms apart from water, right? So it's just creating pure O2, which when you do that, it can, because like pure oxygen is a effective algae inhibitor. Like, you know, we're not putting pure oxygen in our tanks when we have an air pump or something like that, right? It's whatever is atmospheric, so there's nitrogen, there's all this kind of stuff. But pure oxygen is a great algae inhibitor. You just have to, like, not constantly do it, right? That's why they do a little burst, and then it goes off for a while, and there's a burst, and it goes off for a while. I personally have never tried them because I think they're way too expensive. I do not understand why something that is like $3 of parts and labor total, because they're made in China, right? They cost like nothing to build those things, is going to cost you and I $60. If they were like $15, I'd probably have them in several of my tanks. But they're ludicrously expensive. And I just cannot abide by companies that like basically use their name to drastically overcharge for a piece of hardware and technology that has been around since like what, the 70s? The 80s? Earlier? I mean, that like concept of using small electric current to split hydrogen and oxygen atoms inside water has been around for a long time. It's not like they were the like creator of this technology and have a patent on it. They just made one that looks pretty. Why is it 60 freaking bucks? Yeah, that's like one of those things, right? Yeah. So that's my. Maybe it's like preaching a little too hard on being semi-thrifty, but there are certain things I'm willing to spend extra money on, like a good light. I will spend extra money on it. But for something that is just pushing oxygen into my system, I shouldn't have to spend a large chunk of money for how little it costs to build, right? You're talking about enough electric current to basically be like 2 or 3 LED diodes. It's like almost nothing, but you use it in a small amount across a mesh network, and it does what it does. So, and maybe it's that like the engineer side of me who's like, how dare you? But yeah, I can't buy in on something that costs that much money. It just can't. I just can't do it. I can't in good conscience do it, because then even if I like it, I would want to talk about it to my audience, and I could never be like, you should spend $60 on this dumb oxygen thing. It would drive me nuts. Higer has a really good programmable light, 30 inches, cost me about $70. You know, Higer had a representative who recently contacted me, and man, off that contact, I don't know that I could ever use a Higer product ever. I know they make very economically friendly products as far as paying the aquarium design tax is concerned, but there was something in that interaction I did not like at all. It felt wrong, and it's basically just the way that they approach their wording, and maybe it's because English is probably not the first language there, so there's a translational error. But it just was one of those things where, like, I read the email several times, responded, and then the response I received just made me go like, nope, I don't want to deal with you. Not at all. Granted, I basically say no to almost everyone. So there's that too. However, I have heard that like lots of people love their products, so that's good. If they provide a good product at a good price, I appreciate that. But yeah, yeah. Maybe eventually I'll test one other things. It's one of the things I just like. I can only do so many things at once, with my time and the number of like the free space I have to like effectively test things, and have a semi controlled environment, if you will. Uh, oh, fishy mailman's moving. Watch out! Watch out! All right, Gary Duncan. Good to see you, man. You're in here all the time. Since blue light causes more algae, how do saltwater keepers get away with running mostly blue light? Good question. So the big thing about saltwater is that if you look at the fauna that they stock in their tanks, lots of yellow tangs, wrasses, tangs in general, a large number of your community reef fish are algae eaters. Part of keeping reefs in balance is having mostly algae cleanup crew to keep the algae off all your coral. So, part of what they're doing in the way that they build those tanks is they're inherently front loading a ton of algae consumption in their fish, who are just constantly maintaining that tank. Like my friend Darren, right? Doesn't have a ton of coral in his tank. He's got a big tank. He's got a ton of light on it. He has 5 yellow tangs. He has a whitetail tang, a ton of snails, and there's a blue tang in there, and a few other fish. All of them eat algae. Every single one of them eats algae. And they're constantly, if you watch, I was just sitting there for a while, he was just constantly picking. All these fish are constantly picking at the rock and picking around the corals and like just constantly looking for every little bit they can eat. So that's part of how they deal with it, right? Is that there's a significantly larger number of algae eaters in saltwater fish because it's one of the most plentiful sources of food around for the fish that live around coral and do well around coral. Right? It's one of those things where, unlike freshwater tends to have a lot of fish that are really picky about the way that they eat algae. Your plecos are really great at like surface algae and stuff like that, or reticulated hillstream loaches. Autocyclists kind of like are really good at diatom and biofilm, but not so much at our filamentous algae. Your Florida flagfish can eat filamentous algae really well, but anything that's on a glass surface or on a flat surface are terrible at it, right? There's an interesting balance of how these things happen in freshwater that often we don't build a tank in freshwater the way they would in saltwater to account for algae. So we tend to, in saltwater, or in freshwater rather, do different things to minimize the amount of algae, where often in saltwater you actually kind of want to encourage some amount of algae because it helps continuously feed your fish, so that you're not 100% reliant on like pieces of kelp and or other forms of produced foods to feed that tank. I hope that makes sense. Because it's one of the things that I've observed in general of watching most like reef tanks, especially a little different with like fowler tanks, but even then, you still tend to have a lot of algae cleanup crew, or in your sump, you'll have a refugium with the chaeto algae, right? And this stuff, it grows like weeds, right? It's like having water sprite or rotala or pogostema on octopus, any of these super fast growing plants, and it sucks up all the stuff the other algae would handle, and then you just remove it like excess plants and just leave it in your refugium, handling all these things for you. And there's a lot of other like technology that gets used that takes away a lot of the things that algae over time would be able to feed on, that doesn't function very well in freshwater. So things like protein skimmers and stuff like that, those don't function very well in freshwater. But in saltwater, they're like super effective filtration methods that take out everything that often is like some of the leftovers in your planted tanks that your plants are going to go after. This just makes it so it's never there in the first place. So there's so little for algae to like suddenly have a massive outbreak on if the tank is done correctly. Good question. I actually like that question a lot because it lets us look at the difference between, I guess you would say, like the philosophy of putting together tanks in the two different styles between fresh and salt, right? Good question. I like it. Michael, thank you for becoming an autosynclist. Welcome, welcome, welcome. You'll see some interesting stuff here and there. So when I can, there's some fun stuff on the member side, little behind the scenes peeks and such. Make sure I didn't miss a question. Okay, got Gary. Perfect. Tatiana. Hi, Bentley. I just had all of my Amano shrimp overnight after a water change. Check my water parameters. I'm assuming they all passed away? Is my guess here? Make sure I didn't miss an extra. Yeah, my biggest thing would be like how different was the temperature, and how different was like some of the KH or pH of the water coming in before it, not including the water that was there. So, you know, how big is the difference in our water between our tap water source versus the water that had been in the tank? Because that can cause some kind of shock. And, you know, shrimp are a little more susceptible in general to water parameter shifts than some of our fish are. Our fish can handle it a lot better, where shrimp can't necessarily. The other thing to keep in mind is, like, depending on your water, you could have some kind of like heavy metals in your water, and this is not very common. I want to keep this in mind. So this is like really spitballing very deep into potential. But you could have some kind of heavy metals like copper or something like that in small doses the plants can take care of if you have plants. But if you had a significantly large water change, it might be an overload and could cause problems with the shrimp, again, because they're very susceptible to certain things in water. There's a lot of testing we could do, like testing your tap water, understanding like what your temperature was and your process for doing that water change, that we could like dissect and kind of do like almost forensic analysis on to see if we could figure out the reason why. The other question is like, how long have they been in the tank? Have they only been in the tank for a few days? Maybe it's not the water change that was the problem. Maybe it's the initial conditions of the water. It's like 7 kH seems okay, but you're talking like TDS of 1400? I'd be curious. That seems like a lot. So the question is, what else is in your water that isn't... okay, KH was 8, pH is around 7. So there's a lot of stuff we could dissect into this. It's probably easier done via email, which, by the way, feel free to email me, bentley.pasco@gmail.com. I'll put it in chat one more time. We can dive a little deeper on this and try to get you helped out there. Because I could ask a million questions on live stream and it might not help, but in email I can give you a bunch that you can respond in your own time, and we can kind of go back and forth and try to figure that out. Yeah. TDS is 1400. 1400 TDS seems really high. So I'd be curious what we got going on there. But we'll figure it out. We can figure it out. All right. This is like, Joe, you have some great questions. How will you ever test another light again after the success of the Aqua Sky? That's easy. There's so much variance in lighting out there. The biggest thing is getting to do testing the way I want to do it, as opposed to the way that I can do it in my home currently. So like, whenever I can get my fish room built, right, in my garage, I can set 3 tanks that are exactly the same spec with the same filtration, the same water flow, all that kind of stuff side by side, and I can side by side test what happens when I put 3 different lights with everything else the exact same, with all the same plants. What's the difference, right? How different is this $500 light versus a Fluval plant versus some $60 Haiger light, right? Whatever it may be, whatever those like tests end up being. That's where I'm interested, because there's a lot of like the premium lights that I feel like people talk about how great they are, but they don't put them to a real test to show like where they're good and where they're bad. Because some of those premium lights, like, honestly, put out way more light than you'll ever need, unless you're just dumping CO2 in your tank, and I mean like a lot of CO2, or you're doing some super crazy high tech aquascape where you're working on that tank constantly, like every other day. You're doing maintenance and stuff like that, things like that. So I feel like there's some maybe unrealistic selling points that other folks might pay attention to because they have that time to do the maintenance, or they have this really complex setup or whatever it may be, that the average hobbyist might not be able to dissect as easily. So if I put them side by side in more common setups and show them, where you get to watch side by side like 2 or 3 tanks, here's what happens, the difference when everything else is exactly the same. Right, and that's the kind of stuff I really want to get into. And then I can test things like the UNS Titan, Kessel lights, all this crazy nonsense that's out there, because there's a ton of it, like the Chihiros lights. Granted, some of those are very expensive, so I can only do it so fast, but testing a lot of the more economical lights out there, the Haiger, the JCMP, all that kind of stuff, side by side. So you can watch, like, okay, if I have a Beamswork on a tank versus a JCMP on a tank versus a Haiger on a tank versus a Phoenix on a tank, right? Which one's really doing the best for its cost? If they're all the same setup and the only difference is the light, and you see like, man, that JCMP is so bright it creates a ton of algae, but this one over here is so dim that plants are dying off, but this one over here is just right? Like the Goldilocks scenario, right? Can we see these things side by side, and where's the real benefit to us as hobbyists, especially if we want to do like, well, what happens when I compare all of the best lighting, or what happens when my budget's only $70 for a light on a 40 breeder? What's the best light for my budget? Things like this. Those are the things I want to get into. So yeah, I got lots of lights to test, but trying to like just review a light side by side, because I get a lot of requests to do that. A surprising amount. And it's kind of one of those things where it's like, well, each one needs several months of work, and when I kind of only have like 1 or 2 tanks to test on, it's very hard to keep up. Especially some of the lights that cost a ton of money. Like I get asked about the Chihiros probably once a week. Like, hey, can you give us a review on the Chihiros? And it's like, I kind of don't want to spend $450 on a light that is just for one video. That's a little much. I have a small channel. My budget of like fun money for playing around with fish tech is only so much. I can answer, Zelf. I can answer your question right now. Does anyone know if Bentley is testing Corey's new light? I am not. I have not been asked to. I have not been offered to. So I am not. Will I if I'm offered to? Yes, of course. I would love to give more feedback on and see what's up to, but I'm pretty sure it's only people inside like the true co-op network, if you will, the program ambassadors, or whatever the heck they call them now. I don't know what it is, but I'm not one of those people, so I'm not in there. I'm just a casual observer, very curious to see what the heck Corey is working on with whatever manufacturer he's using. I'll be curious to see what it is when it comes out. Brandon, does anyone know if the Bactra AE sale is still available? It's sold out. The number of ones that were for sale, I tried to check it this morning to see if more were made available on sale, and I did not see any. Feel free to check again. But the Brightwater Biomedia is still on sale, last I checked, and it's super cheap. Like $8 a box on that Mini S, I think, is unreal. I think the last time I bought a bunch of it, I was paying I think it was like $12 a box. And I was like thrilled to pay that much, because the box is a good size. There's a good amount in there, and it's really, really nice media. Obviously a spoiler for the video I'm working on, but it's really good. It's really, really good. It's really good. And here's another example, right? I would love to be able to test that Brightwater media, side by side with the thing I always get asked about, stupid Biohome Ultimate, versus just generic, cheapo ceramic rings. Right? I would love to test those things side by side in tanks, where it's just, here's 3 tanks, they all have the exact same filter, they all have the same, like, volume of media in them, right? We're just filling up one tray in a Oase Biomaster, or whatever the heck gets chosen as the filter. Which one can handle more? Which one establishes a bacteria colony faster? You know, things like that. Like, trying to make sure that you take away anything but basically that one thing and compare them side by side and really test them side by side. It's something that I really want to do, because I feel like there's a lot of value to us as hobbyists to see that. It's granted, it's expensive to do that stuff, but yeah, whatever. Yeah, I'm down. T. Kirkbride, it's almost 3 a.m. and I shouldn't be on YouTube, but I wanted to swing by and say hello. Have a great day. You, sir, get some rest, and then, when you wake up, have a fantastic day. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I love it. I love it when people just, like, drop in at, like, crazy hours. It's the best. Mary Beth McCubbins. Good to see you, Mary Beth. My Pokestamos Stellatus octopus has not grown in a month. I've had it planted, used liquid fertilizer. I have root tabs. Am I missing something? My other plants are growing. Interesting. So, what I'd be curious about is, are we seeing any differences in the upper growth or the lower growth? Like, if it's still, like, healthy leaf structure everywhere, there's probably something going on where there might be something else that's competing really well for the nitrates, or maybe just that it's taking significantly longer to root itself. I have seen whenever I clipped my Pokestamon in the past and replanted those things without any roots, it took a while before it started growing again without CO2. With CO2, it was really fast. But it seemed like it took a while for it to establish its new root system and be happy before I started seeing that growth. And then once it started growing, it started taking off like crazy. But that's just Pokestamons in general. Once they start growing, they tend to grow at a pretty good rate. Not too crazy when you don't have CO2, but if you have CO2, man, they grow quick. They grow really quick. I remember bringing like 3-foot lengths of octopus out of my guppy mansion like every other week. It was just, it got tiresome. That's why I removed it. Yeah. Joe Davis, I only recently discovered the benefits of longer hours of light for particular plant species. Used to run 6, but now I'm up to 10 with no ill effect. Yeah, so it depends on the plant. Certain plants really thrive in low intensity light for a long photo period. This is like your swords, your crypts, Anubias boosts, Java ferns. They all do great with like low light, but for a long time. And there are other plants who really need that strong intensity light for potentially short periods, but sometimes longer periods, to be the most effective. And that tends to be like your super fine leaf stuff. So like Rotala Any, some of like the feather duster type looking stuff. There's Ludwigia Tornado, Ludwigia White. A lot of your like rarer stuff tends to like big intensity in short periods, or sometimes even slightly longer, like 8 hours. But if you think about nature, right? In summer and spring, when all the most plant growth happens, plants don't get 4 and 6 hours of light. They get like 12, 13, 14, 15 hours of light. Just, it's in a curve. That intensity can be really short where it's at the most, but it's getting light for a long period of time in nature. So for us to be like, oh no, plants only need 4 hours of light, like that, to me, then this is the least scientific thing out there, right? I am not a botanist. I don't have any science to back this up. This is just me thinking like a semi-logical human being, because I am known to be a little crazy, so I'm not perfectly logical. But it's just, plants in nature don't get 4 hours of light. They might get shaded light, or they might get less intense light. They might not be in direct sunlight the whole time, but they get a lot of light time, right? A day has a lot of light in it. So denying them light for shorter periods feels like it goes counter to what that plant is supposed to get. Hope that makes sense. It's like little up there in the brain piece. It tries to think out there. Okay. This is a question. Sorry, I've been missing this, but Lester Zhang, when is too much water change? Okay. This is completely based on your water. So let me give you an example. If you are using a lot of stuff to buffer your water because you need it to get significantly softer or significantly harder than whatever comes out of your tap, and you're changing water like every other day, that's probably too much because you're constantly fighting your natural water. But some people will say that like the percentage of water change is what tells you whether it's too much or too little. Some people will say the frequency is what tells you too much, too little. Really, every situation is its own. That's the problem, is that your water and my water are very different. And what you're keeping and what I'm keeping could be the same fish, but because the water is different, the way that we apply our maintenance regime might need to be very different. Now, in general, I would say that up to 50% water change once a week is perfectly fine. You could do 50% every other week. You could do 25% once a week. These are all fine. But once you start going 75%, 80, 90% worth of water change in a week, you risk having your bacterial cultures take some kind of hit and potentially crashing your tank or having some kind of spike or outbreak. There's lots of issues that happen if you change too much water in a period of time because it starts swinging the parameters of your tank around, right? As our tanks and the bacteria sit there and process ammonia into nitrite and then process nitrite into nitrate, that lightly acidifies your water over time. So if you have fairly hard water, but you only top off, right? Then you're kind of having this light thing where the nutrients kind of can slowly creep up over time. Because as the water evaporates, most of those extra minerals stay there. But if you have very soft water with very little in it, like my water, right? Every time that you're just topping off, you're kind of keeping the nutrients relatively similar, those mineral contents relatively similar, but things absorb that mineral, so you need to kind of pay attention. In the end, what's going to help you? Test your water. If you start to see something go out of whack, that's a good time to do like a 35% water change, 50% water change. Just get some fresh water in there. In general, I think if someone does like a 25% water change once a week or up to 50%, you could go anywhere between 25 and 50 once a week. That's fine. If you want to do it every other week, still okay. Just make sure that if you're only water changing every other week, test your water still once a week, right? Just pay attention to your water, watch your cycle, because certain times a year, different things can happen in your water. You might have more mineral content in the summer as there's some evaporation and stuff naturally happening in your local water system. Where in the winter, it might be more diluted because there's snow and extra rain and all these extra water sources around that dilute the system down, create far more water in your natural systems, whether it's a well, whether it's city water, whatever it may be. Your water has all these little shifts depending on the time of year. Just like how nature changes, so does your tank water. Your water that's coming out of your tap, whether it's from a well or from a city, whatever it may be, has little changes in it. Be aware of those changes. If you have a local water company that gives you water reports, pay attention to those water reports. I have them specifically from my water company. I get them emailed. It's like once every 3 months or whatever. I look at them because I can tell you that I hit a certain time of the year, every year, and I get a big outbreak of hair algae. And it goes away in like 2 weeks. Because they flush their system every time, and it throws a bunch of extra mineral content at like the same time, early June, every year. It's been this way for the last 5 years I've been keeping fish here in this house. It's happened every time about the same time, first or second week of June. There's a flush of the system. I get a big outbreak of hair algae in a bunch of tanks, and then it slowly goes away because all that extra mineral content goes away. Pay attention to your water. Know your water, and it'll tell you everything you need to know. Knowing your water is one of the biggest things that will help you long-term to being a really, really good aquarist. because you can tell by shifts in your water and stuff like that. And testing is your best friend. Testing is your best friend to understand your water long term. You'll be able to tell, like, well, that fish is doing something weird. Or that plant looks a little strange. Let me test real fast, right? Or just, oh, this is going on. I probably need a water change. Or, oh, there's probably too much mineral content. Not enough mineral content. Whatever these things may be, right? You'll learn these little things over time as you just observe and observe and observe. Patience is your friend. Learn your water as best you can, and you'll be just fine. And then you'll know, like, I can do a 35% water change every 3 days, and it's perfect, because fish XYZ loves it. They get so much healthier, they eat more, they spawn more, whatever it may be. You'll learn those things as you learn your water, and it's great. I hope that helps, Lester. That's like the longest diatribe into water, but man. Woo! Okay. A couple more questions before we go. Dr. Blackson channel, he is coming up next in about 15-ish minutes. I do need to go faster than that, though, because I can smell dinner downstairs, and my lunch was kind of small. It was very light and fast, because I was working way too much. Let me see here. I want to make sure I haven't missed anything too crazy and fun. Sad face, Aquarium Co-op won't have the Bentley seal of approval. I mean, it might eventually whenever it comes out, but until I know anything else, like, I can't say that I know anything about the light. At some point, I'll probably test it just because I'm curious what will be produced, and whether or not I'm actually going to like it, and whether or not I think that Corey's decision process was good. I'm sure it will be. Like, he's kept plants and fish for a long time. He's ran a store for a long time. I'm sure that he'll build a reasonable product. But, you know, there might be pitfalls to it that if he's trying to make something more economically friendly, it might not have, like, the control of a Fluval or something like that. It depends. It all depends on what the end goal was, whether he wants a more budget-friendly light or whether he wants, like, the best light he can build. I'll be curious. Mike Stambaugh, if you were doing an outdoor tub in a spot that gets full sun for about 4 hours a day, what floating plant would you use in a fry grow out tub? So I wouldn't use anything that's too small. I would use something that gets a really robust root system underneath it to act as extra hides. So you could look at something like Wisteria, Water Sprite, and float that. It does very, very well. You could also look at, like, proper full-grown water lettuce. It's a lot easier to remove because it's so much bigger. So when the tank gets overloaded, it's easy to remove. I would avoid things like duckweed or Salvinia. Frogbit can be okay, but I personally don't like Frogbit. Any of the smaller leaf stuff can be a real nightmare to remove. I'd avoid that stuff. But you can do well with some of the other stuff. If you can find it, Asian watergrass is freaking amazing. It has a really nice root structure. It's got a big blades of leaves. It can provide some really good shade, and it tolerates really strong light. So, good options. Lots of options. It's just kind of what look you like or what you're going for. In general, I would say just find something with a really robust root structure because that's going to help those fish have extra hides for the babies. Gary Duncan, I wish someone would test Dustin's fish tanks lights. For some reason, I feel they are malarkey. So, I've had some of those lights in person, and I'm pretty confident I know who makes those lights for Dustin. And I'll say this. There's a guy in my local club who has been trying to sell 2 of those lights for the last 3 months, and no one has bought them. He's got them at a reasonable price. Not great, but reasonable. And no one's bought them. My problem with them is they're not a very broad light, and they don't have a very wide angle of spread. I've actually encountered some of these way back. If you look at Reefworks, when he held an aquascaping contest, they had the lights on those tanks. And just in general, I kind of looked at it and I was like, I do a lot of bigger tanks. I do things like 40 breeders a lot. I would need 2 or 3 of these for a 40 breeder. And for me, they're a little too expensive to look into that versus just I could do 1 Fluval, whether it's the Aqua Sky or the plant, or 1 JCMP did very well on a 40 breeder, right? And that's a $60-$70 light. So it's hard for me to justify looking at them or trying to test them because I see them as overpriced for what I'm getting. Now, if I actually had one in my hands and tested it properly, I might be able to easily retract that and say, oh no, here's why it's good. But I know the philosophy behind them because I've talked to a person who I am pretty confident owns the company that makes it for him. And it's very interesting to find out kind of the history on the design of those lights. And it's very smart. There's some great research in them, but that assumes that they're made by that person. If they're just like a clone of those and made by someone else, I don't know the quality of them overall. I don't know. I would hope they're good for their price. That would be my biggest thing. Mike D. Bentley, have you ever used the Vivigro LED? If so, what do you think about it? I have 2 of them. I'm trying to remember which one that is. The name isn't familiar, so now I have to go look it up. Oh, this thing. Yeah, this is like another kind of Phoenix 24/7 budget light. It's probably very similar to the JCMP light I tested. No, I've never used it. I've looked at this thing on Amazon before, and basically anything that has like the rip-off 24/7 controller, I almost instantly ignore. It's not because I hate them. It's because there's so many of them out there that it's hard to know if there's actually a real reasonable difference between them all. But yeah. Haven't tested it. Couldn't give you a straight answer. Tatiana Bentley, could you suggest a good RO system? The friends of mine that do RO, almost all of them have bought theirs from Bulk Reef Supply. They just have the standard Bulk Reef Supply one, but I'm sure almost any RO system is going to be good. They're all designed to do the same thing. Just find the one that's the best, either easiest to set up from what you can tell, or B, most economically friendly for you, for its quality. There are some super cheap. If it seems too cheap to be good compared to, like, let's say it's like a third the price of whatever Bulk Resupply is, it's probably too cheap to actually be decent. Go with those kind of rules, right? Just like, does it seem too cheap? It's probably extra cheap. Joe Davis, what fish are in the Fluval? Recently acquired because basic company mods on the Flex. Okay, so in that tank right now, there's 1 super red bristlenose pleco, 2 older reticulated Siamese algae eaters, and a couple. There used to be more. They've slowly been passing away because they're fish I adopted from actually Master Breeder Dean. He struggled with them. The Melanda rainbow fish. So the Melanda Gold from Wallace Road. They're a fish that's like, very few of them actually came out of Australia. They're one of the things that the Rainbow Conservation Fund is working on protecting. Dean basically had no females survive, so he brought me a group of males, and a couple of them have passed away over time because they're a dwarf species that doesn't live quite as long. I think there's like 2 left in the tank right now. He brought me 5 originally, 6. I think it was 5. And they've just kind of slowly been passing away over time, but I keep them fed, and I leave algae on this tank on purpose so that there's constantly something for the pleco to graze on, and everybody gets fed pretty much every morning. You can see my little tropical super vit sitting here that I feed everybody, and they gobble it up like crazy. Yeah. But yeah, it's one of the dwarf rainbows that I think actually does well in a small tank. Long term, I think when I lose the last of those rainbows, I'm actually probably going to break this tank down entirely. I don't know if you guys can see it, but turn my squeaky chair. The divider that's back here as I scare my SAE, the seal is kind of broke on it in the sense that the silicone that held it in place, so it just kind of like sits there and bends in friction in place. And I'm just going to remove the whole thing, and take the pump out and the head in there and just probably replace it with like a sponge filter and just use it as a slightly nicer looking 15-gallon tank, right? I'll probably change the stocking on it entirely. I might make it something that like becomes like my ladies tank or something. She wants to do a fish tank of her own. She actually wants to do a tank. She's told me this. I don't know if she really wants to follow through, but she wants to do a Blackbeard algae aquascape. So she wants her tank to be a lot of Blackbeard algae and like driftwood. That's her. That's what she wants to do. And then we're gonna do it. She's eventually getting a tank where that's what she gets to do. She gets to stock it however the heck she wants with some advisement, right? We won't put like cold water fish with a betta or something, right? We're not going to do something crazy like that, but she's expressed interest in doing a fish tank, so eventually we'll do one for her. It might be this, it might be like an extra 20 long somewhere, but that's what she wants to do. She wants a Blackbeard algae aquascape. And she's kind of an artist. You guys have seen like all my cool thumbnails. Those are all things that she does. I'm very interested to see when I just like provide her materials, how she either A, directs me or decides to just like dig her hands in and do it herself. And I'll be very interested to see how that thing evolves, because I'm gonna have to like, I have some Blackbeard in a couple tanks, but it's relatively under control, so I'll have to like transplant Blackbeard algae from a tank into another tank and wrap it on wood. Right? This is crazy. But that's what she wants. She likes the way it looks. She loves all that kind of stuff. That's just what she's down on. That's what she wants to do. I don't know. That's what she wants. So we'll push more blue light on the tank and all that kind of nonsense and help it grow. Okay. There's like one more question I want to get to here from Xanadu. What's up, buddy? Okay, hold on. I'll read this comment first. Shirish, I made my name to be the ultimate way to live stream troll when YouTube first started live streams. Nobody could figure it out. It's complicated, man. It's complicated. It's all right. Everybody got my last name wrong forever, so it's fine. Joel trolled me once, and then for there on out, everybody assumed that was how you actually pronounce my last name. The Pascal. All right. Xanadu, you be the last question for the night, buddy. Looking at rainbows for a newer 75-gallon dirt plants, preference of 4 to 6 plus of one species, or 1 to 2 each of a few species. So here's the thing. When you mix the species, right, they'll still shoal together and hang out together and all that kind of stuff. But when you have higher numbers of the same species, you see different behavior. You get to see how they would actually school together. Also, it's easier to breed when you have more of the same species. If you ever want to breed those fish, you never want to breed in a mixed rainbow tank, because you will get mixed crossfish, and the hybrids don't usually look very good. Sometimes they do, but most of the time they kind of look like a dull, brassy brown fish, and it's just kind of ugly. I've got one downstairs. He's not the prettiest thing in the world, but he's a big old boy. But yeah, in general, I would say one in a 75-gallon, you can do more than 4 to 6. But if you're putting a lot of other fish in, then yeah, 4 to 6 is pretty safe. I would say go more to that 6 to 8, or even like 6 or 7. If you do 7, what I would really suggest is do the same species, 3 males, 4 females. We always want a little bit more female than male, because that helps reduce the kind of the aggression of the males chasing the same females over and over again and just stressing them out. 2, with extra females, you'll see full male courting and sparring behavior, which can be really, really, really fun to watch, and they'll do it every day once they mature. This is really fun to watch them just kind of like what I like call broadsiding each other, like 2 battleships that are shaking at each other and then swimming all over the place and chasing each other. It's very fun behavior that rainbows have. And I think you really only get that when you have all the same species. They'll do some of it when it's a mixed species, but when it's all the same species, you see it in way better fashion. So that would be me. Now, of course, what species you choose, that's 100% up to you. Definitely you choose the species. Lots of options out there. All sorts of stuff. Go nuts. All right, gang. thank you so much for being here tonight. I know it's been a little bit of a crazy ramble. W. Marion, your lady is a rebel. Yes, she is. She likes to go against the common thing and do something a little different, a little more artsy. But yeah, guys, thank you so much for being here. I hope you'll look forward to. We got several good videos coming up. There's a couple different reviews that are all coming up. So I've got the Aquasky review, and then not long after that, I'll start building the ultimate guide for the Aquasky, just like we did for the Fluval plant. I've got a review of Brightwater Media coming very soon because I've been testing it for quite a while. There is a canister filter that is quite popular that I have a review coming up for. I've been testing it for about 2 months now. So yeah, that's coming as well. And then some other good stuff along the way. We'll eventually get to the in-depth solutions starting to hit us here soon as we're getting close to, I think, the crux of one doing its job. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and stay awesome.